Good afternoon and welcome to Building the Black Educator Pipeline Podcast. I am your host, Shayna Terrell. I am Director of Pipeline Programming at the Center for Black Educator Development. And once again, it's on, y'all. I'm still out here walking in my purpose as an educator activist, dedicating my life to fighting for freedom and liberation for my people. I'm out here representing Philly, but by way, of course, of the South Bronx, where I was born and raised. So thank you to everybody for joining us this week as we as a center are still out here continuing our quest to diversify the teacher pipeline. And as we launch our initiative to rebuild the Black teacher pipeline, the first comprehensive one, we're going to be doing that by using our 444 model, supporting folks from high school to and through their first 4 years of teaching. Today's conversation is a hot topic for me. It's very necessary, it's very important, and is much needed. So this week's theme will be Black male voices, building the Black educator pipeline. And we'll be talking to two amazing gentlemen today. I'm excited that they're both at different stages of the pipeline. We have a seasoned, or he would like to be called mildly seasoned, Black male educator, and an aspiring Black male educator that will be joining us today for conversation. In the nation today, there are only 2% of Black men that make up the teaching workforce. Knowing that our low-income Black boys are the most, or one of the most vulnerable populations right now, we have to help them. And part of the ways that we can do that is by giving them access to Black male educators. We know that having one Black teacher reduces their chances of dropping out by 39%. Then we should be investing in supporting quality Black male educators to improve the quality of life for these young men. So major shout out to our funders and everybody out there supporting the center. For courageous acts and revolutionary acts by investing money in this opportunity to support Black educators. And of course, shout out to Citizens Ed, as always, for giving the center this platform and this opportunity to talk about real issues with real people who are in a real struggle. So for all my folks out there watching today, thank you for joining us. But I want to do something big today. If you know a Black male educator, please comment in the chat with his name. Let him know why you are thankful for him and why you're thankful for him being in this profession. So I'm going to model that. I'm going to lead it off. I would like to give a shout out to my husband, Ronald Brown Jr., a Black male educator who has been in the game for over 15 years. I think his presence has had a major impression on a lot of the young Black boys in Philadelphia. He's from Philadelphia, but he came back to actually teach in the community that he's from. So major shout out to my husband and major shout out to the impact that he's made on the lives of hundreds of young Black boys in his over 15 years of teaching in Philadelphia. So shout out to you, Ron. So again, I encourage all my other folks watching, if you know a Black male educator, comment and tag him and thank him for his service of being in the profession. So my first guest, Amir Davis. Amir is a former teacher, principal, and district administrator. Amir joined us here at the center as Director of Black Male Engagement, where he leads various efforts to develop, coach, mentor, and convene current and inspiring Black educators. Along with teaching high school in Philadelphia and leading middle schools in Camden, New Jersey, and New Orleans, Louisiana, Amir's work has primarily included successful turnarounds of historically underperforming schools. His work has now evolved to partnering with district leadership to develop Black male-centered retention, recruitment, and professional development strategies, as well as leading national workshops on culturally responsive teaching practices that centers the voices of often marginalized communities of color. So please welcome to the show, Amir Davis. My next guest to the stage, Horace Ryans III. Horace is a freshman at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, where he studies sociology with a focus on education. Horace is also a Bonner Scholar and continuously serves his community through his college career. He is a native of Philadelphia, where he was involved in the improvement of his local school and upbringing of his fellow students. Horace's passions for youth advocacy has allowed him to get more involved with local organizations in his community. He is currently the founder of our new Green Book Social Action Project. He previously served as Philadelphia City Director of Urban Ed Incorporated, working to bring quality and efficient urban education for all students. In addition, he also served as youth commissioner appointed by Councilman Bobby Heenan, representing District 6 in the city of Philadelphia. He believes that every child has the right to know what's going on in their community. Shielding them won't do them any good. It's our duty to provide them with the resources so that they can begin to advocate for not only themselves, but for their community. He hopes to one day teach in the places he fought for right here in Philadelphia. I also want to highlight Horace is a former junior servant leader for our program, Freedom Schools Literacy Academy, and this coming summer will be a servant leader apprentice serving rising first through third graders. So shout out and welcome Horace. Hey, Horace and Amir, welcome y'all.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as you can tell, I'm super excited to have you both here because I feel like this is an important conversation to have a mildly seasoned Black male educator and aspiring Black male educator in the room for a conversation. On
Mildly
education.
seasoned.
You mild, a little sprinkle on you, brother. You know what I'm
Just
saying?
a little bit, yeah.
You ain't smoked and tender yet. You're just a
No,
little
not yet.
seasoned.
It ain't to the bristle, to the bone just yet.
Horace, we still out here putting you on the grill, brother. Okay, so
Yeah,
you
I accept that. That's okay.
yeah,
That's
you
okay.
coming.
I'll
We
take
got
it.
you though. We're gonna see you though. We got you. But we know, like in a lot of education spaces, it's dominated predominantly by white folks. We know in actual classroom, it's dominated predominantly by white middle class females. The national workforce numbers are about 80%. But even when you have folks controlling and making decisions on education, that space is predominantly white and male. So it's exciting for me to have the voices of not only a youth, but also, again, a seasoned vet in the game talking about issues that affect you and lifting up your voices. So thank you guys.
Yeah.
So I want to start off with talking to both of you about your journey in education. So why did each of you decide to become educators?
Horace, I'll let you go first.
All right. My educational journey, I've always been very fortunate when it comes to my personal education. I went to a charter school K through 8, and then a public magnet, South Leadership Academy, an independent charter school for high school. And I've always been very fortunate to be surrounded by so many cultures and so many people that didn't always look like me, but had a very liberal mindset when it came down to understanding the value of education. And so, through my high school career is when I really started getting involved in education advocacy, because I started realizing that because I had a very unique experience going through education, or unique in terms of Philadelphia students, this was not the norm for most students. For me, like I said, I was surrounded by so many cultures, so many experiences, but you go down to West Philly and, that's not the same. You go to North Philly, that's not the same. Most of the schools are predominantly Black, lower income communities. And the school I went to was in Center City, in a much more affluent part of Philadelphia. And so I started to realize, like, if these students don't understand, or they don't even know, they lack the knowledge to advocate for themselves, then somebody has to do it. And, also working with the privilege of working with so many of adults and so many students, and you start to see the holes that start to develop. So with some of the adults that I was working with, who were mostly white, they can't relate to the experiences of a Black youth in Philadelphia. And the students who I'm working with desperately want to change something, but they don't know how. They don't know to do the policy work. They don't know to do the research. And so part of the reason why I want to become an educator is to, one, be an active informant for my community, and to also enact that change on, if not a policy level, then a structural level inside a school. And that's really where I got my start. And then again, throughout my high school career, I devoted my time and a lot of my efforts to advocating for those who couldn't, or sharing knowledge to those who just didn't know. And that's really where I was like, yeah, you know what, I want to teach. This is my calling. This is my passion.
Dope. And I love the word you use, active informant, right? That sounds like some old co-conspirator stuff. I love that right there. Amir, how about you? What was your
Yeah.
journey? Why did you decide to become an educator?
I wish what I found dope about Horace's story is that he's very, very early on in his career, right? He hasn't actually started it as a teacher of record, but it has so much knowledge, experience, and just awareness of his calling. And I think that's so dope. My story is not similar at all. I didn't figure out I wanted to be a teacher until my senior year of college. And I think before as we were applying this, kind of post-college opportunities, I took an inventory of my life and I said, who have been the biggest impacts on my life? And I looked at it and I said, actually my teachers, my educators, my parents, my first socializers, I actually have been the ones who have invested so much in my life. And I also really took an inventory about where education is and like what is played, like the role is played in my life and how it's afforded me sort of this opportunities and upward mobility, if you will. So by the end of my senior year, I had switched my aspirations, which were to go into medical school and to become a doctor. And I heard this recruiter come in and talk about teaching opportunities. And I had been reading and taking classes on just the economic and social disparities that existed. Taking an inventory of my life. I understood the barriers that I faced and had to overcome. And I recognized that I was the recipient of great generosity, great teachers. And I felt it was my calling to pay it forward. Now, once I got in teaching my first year, as I was teaching at a large comprehensive high school, that is when my eyes opened up to just how real that disparity existed. I myself was fortunate, I suppose. I hate that I have to say this, but fortunate enough to go to a private boarding school that just had different sort of approach to education, and it's the investment of resources in education. And when I saw from a systemic standpoint, the deprivation of resources, the systemic and purposeful and intentional deprivation of resources to some of these most struggling schools that are populated by Black and Brown people, my calling was even much more refined. So I saw myself not only as an educator, but a person who dispenses the same generosity from which I benefited, and also a disruptor of this, this evil system of what we see in the disparities of achievement for our schools and such. So, yeah.
And Amir, I want to say, like, I appreciate you pointing out, it's not something that you have to hate to say, of like you going to a private school. Because I think one thing that has to always like be lifted up, especially in the Black male experience, is that Black men are not monolithic. They come from all different experiences and all different backgrounds. So for somebody like Horace, even in his very own city, he was having a very different experience than probably somebody who lived up the street from him, who was attending his neighborhood school. But I think the reason why it's important to point that out, because I think that when we think about young Black boys in the system, a lot of times we are thinking about the most vulnerable population of them, right? The ones who are in degraded schools or at risk of dropout. But I think that then leads people to ignore folks like you and Horace, who are still in need of male companionship and male mentorship.
Absolutely.
And speaking of that, have either of you ever had a Black teacher?
A Black male teacher once.
Okay, what grade?
I got my first Black, like my full-time, you have plenty of substitutes in middle school, but first full-time Black teacher was in 9th grade. And he taught, Mr. K taught me English for 9th and 10th grade, but that was it after that. So,
wow.
But that's dope. What did that experience do for you? Do you feel like it was different having a Black male teacher than just having a regular teacher or white teacher?
Yeah. So in the beginning, I wasn't very conscious of like the severity of the situation. Like this is my first black male teacher, and I've been here in education for like 8 years now. Like now I'm in ninth, 10th grade. Like this is the first time. And so it wasn't until afterward that I realized like, yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why I wanted to get into education, because the way that Mr. K could move his classroom and the way that he structured conversations that included race and included those hot topics that you're not really supposed to talk about in school because it's like taboo. Because he is black, he had that like, yeah, you're I'm not going into a classroom as a white teacher trying to teach race. It was as if he was teaching race from his own personal experience, from his own perspective as a black man. And so I really didn't come as a conscious thing until I had moved on to 11th and 12th grade. And I was like, I haven't had a black teacher since. I haven't had a black male teacher since until I got to school, until I got to Morehouse. And so it was one of those things I was just like, well, like, why is that? Why am I only exposed to this when I'm still developing, but I'm near that point where it's just like, okay, now I have to be an adult and start to get to these different places. Why was it until now that I just got this teacher? And I wish, and it is my hope that as time goes on, black male teachers do slowly become more and more popular in inner city schools, because we need them. We desperately need them. Because for me, it was also a sense of having someone I could turn to, even if I didn't completely express everything that I expressed, and even if I didn't feel like I could, I know I can. I know I can always go to him if I really needed to. So it was a very, very unique experience. And if you hear stories from other young black men who say, like, I've never had one, that's a harsh reality. I'm blessed to have had one. Some people don't get it. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I was in the harsh reality of never having one through my K through 12 experience. I didn't have a black teacher until I got to Temple University, and even that black teacher was because I took African American studies courses. So for me, I had never had one in my K through 12 experience. Amir, how about you?
Yeah, I hadn't had a teacher who was not black until fourth grade.
Oh, dope.
So my mother was extremely intentional about putting myself and my siblings into Afrocentric schools that were centered and couched in black pedagogy, black experience, elevating, Afrocentric or African diaspora heritage. So yeah, I hadn't experienced that until I hadn't experienced peers like my fellow students that were not black or brought up in that same sort of value system until I was in fourth grade. But in terms of black male teachers, even in the early years, so from pre-K all the way up to third grade, I don't remember having a black male teacher. And certainly I did not have one from fourth grade on. I think my first black male teacher was in college. And interesting enough, so like you have these fantasies about black male teachers, right? Like because they're such a unicorn. At least for me, I had this fantasy like that, like I'm gonna like this. When I see this person, we're just gonna have this unspoken connection. He's gonna understand my plight. It's just gonna like be in his class is gonna be such a liberating experience because we just have this shared experiences. It was not the case when I had them. I had a black male as my English professor at Georgetown University. It was not the case, and at least how I imagined it. And so I really do think about just the burden that we as black male teachers that we take on is we have to uphold these fantasies of our students who are clamoring for our presence, right? While simultaneously holding their education, pushing them, interacting with parents and being, a force for our colleagues as well. But like Chorus, I think when folks hear both of our stories, I hope folks are hearing a call to action, right? This is much, much needed. And students need it, our colleagues need it, our society needs it, our communities need it. We just need folks who understand, who teach well superbly, right? Like that's the main thing, who can teach students how to read, write, and do math at really, really high levels. But we also need folks who have an understanding of the culture and the context from which our students come.
And I know like you guys can talk from your experiences too. But I just wonder, especially you, Amir, going from having all Black teachers into moving into a very different setting than that. For just young Black men, what effect does that have on them by not having Black teachers within their education ecosystem? So you had the experience of having them and then not having them. So I'm just thinking about the culture shock in that. And then for Horace, to get to high school and just have like one Black male. So even if we scroll like how many Black teachers did you actually have? So like what impact does that have on young Black men to not be surrounded by Black teachers?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. One thing I'll tie from personal experience, I'm sure a lot of young Black men and women have heard this line, but you talk white. And I say that as a point to kind of refer to that kind of cultural identity when you get to school and you're shaping your social identity, and school is shaping it as you're shaping your own identity. And the portion of the piece of like you talk white is part of that is because, again, I went to a very affluent school with a bunch of varying cultures, and who I saw myself as wasn't always fully Black because of the cultural experiences that my cousins down in Southwest Philly had, or the people up the block who moved from North Philly to Northeast Philadelphia. So the connection I had with the Black students at my middle school and high school never really felt genuine because like the cultural divide that was there because I didn't value my Black experience as I do now. And so I say all that to say, in terms of having a Black teacher, a lot of our young Black men who lack father figures because of a disproportionate amount of systemic racism in our society.
Talk about it.
That lack of Black male mentorship. Amir, the beauty of your experience is that you had Black teachers up until fourth grade, but now let's imagine if those teachers were Black men, and if you had this like underlying like foundation of like hopefully this is what a Black man should be. This is what a Black success looks like. That's not an athlete. That's not, anything that is feeding into the stereotype of what Black men are. I think about that a lot. It's part of the reason why I want to teach, where I decided on teaching elementary grades, because there are so many Black men and some of the young Black men in my life who I want to be there for. And it is, again, like you said, this sense of being a unicorn, because there's not many of them in education, not many of us in education, because it's one of those things that's like, we need to let the woman do that. When no, that's an old statement, and it's dated and it's sexist and it's all those things. And we have to be very aware of like, these young Black men need us. They need us, and they want us too. And the value of that is just, it blows my mind every single time, because it's not, it's missed and it's sad, So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to that before I moved on to the next topic.
Yeah, Horace, you brought up this. The question was the impact on Black students or Black male students, and Horace, you brought up this idea of talking white, and so what I'm hearing, and also in my own experiences, like this lack of validation of our identity. So that's what's at stake when we do not have Black male figures, Black male teachers and our teachers are our first socializers, our first shapers of how we perceive this world and navigate this world.
Yep.
If you do not have someone who can understand and couched in real experience and can therefore validate your identity and your experience, I mean, I could just understand the turmoil that you will have as you're navigating these schools, on top of fighting this institution that is riddled with white supremacy and the curriculum that how we treat each other, the structures, right? So I know for myself, from fourth grade up until 12th grade, there was this idea, there was something that was instilled inside of me from my household, from my early teachings, about this heritage of who you are as a Black male. So that is a valid thing, and that's a rich experience. When you go into these experts, these teachers, and they do not, in fact, they combat that identity. It
Mm-hmm.
just sends you like, where do I fit here? You know, I didn't see myself in the curriculum. I didn't see myself in the teaching. Um, and you just have to kind of fight this like, I know what I was taught, and I know what I'm told, and I know what I feel, in my household, but then I have to navigate this white supremacy institution. It's just a very difficult thing. I do want to kind of circle back to one of the things I said. I said I hate to say it. I went to boarding school. I'm not saying that I hate the fact that I went to boarding school. What I am saying, however, though, is my family made the decision that we had to leave our zip code, the zip code which we are in, which we have history, our families in order to find a better education. And what I saw from my experience, and when I became a teacher, I did not want that to exist. That students got a different, lower quality education because of their zip code and the color of their skin. I did not want that to exist. So I taught every single day as if I'm teaching the future scholars and leaders of our world. So when I say again, when I say that experience and I talk about it, that experience in boarding school is more this system that we had to navigate, that I fight as a disruptor now, as an educator, that no student receives a low quality education because of their zip code.
And your experience is the experience of so many. And I think that as Black people, sometimes we are ashamed to say that we're privileged because we're fighting against a certain type of privilege. Like I went to parochial schools from K through 12. I didn't go to the local public school, and I understand that there's a certain type of privilege that lives in that. But the fight that your parents fought are the fight that millions of Black families fight every day, trying to find the right school and the right choice for their child. I think what makes us sad and what keeps all three of us grounded in this work and what drives Horace to want to go back and teach in Philadelphia is that sadly, some people just don't have a choice. They have the choice that they are given. So it's your neighborhood school, and you might have a charter up the street that is a quarter better than the neighborhood school. But we all know that there are millions of Black children living in cities and communities without quality education and quality educators. So again, shout out to your mom for being relentless and
Yeah, shout out to mom. Mom, if
you know,
you on here, shout out to you.
shout
I love you.
all
Mom,
our
I
moms.
love
You know what
you.
I'm saying? Because like, we're gonna get our babies ahead, right? But shout out to the mothers out there who may not have the resources that our parents have, who are still fighting. Know that you're not alone. We out here fighting with y'all. We out here fighting with y'all. But this then brings the question to me as we're talking about this lack of Black male presence. Why do we think that there aren't more Black men who are interested in teaching? Where's that absence? Why is this absence existing?
Yeah, I'm going to reserve my opinion because it could be a bit jaded. No, it's not jaded, but I'm curious to hear from an aspiring one who is breaking down the odds and still wants to teach. So I hate to put you on the spot, brother, but
nah, it's all good. I love making my brain work. I actually love that. So when we talk about a lack of human bodies, of lack of Black bodies in this institution of education, it's very important, I think, to note that when these young Black men are going into their schools, you have to really see it through how they see it. And I have struggled with this because it's not been my experience, and I can only retell the stories that I've heard. But you walk to school through let's say you go to a neighborhood school, you walk to schools through your neighborhood that, like Amir, like you said, the zip code might not always be the best for this education. Let's also assume that because the school is failing, the neighborhood's also failing, and a plethora of other issues that go on in lower income neighborhoods that are heavily populated by minority students and minorities in general. And so you see what these young Black students see, which is poverty, low health care, low income housing, people on the corner who are doing this, and that. And you have to see, like, okay, then what is their main influence? They might go into a school with teachers who, could be the best teachers ever. However, they have a lack of resources. They don't have textbooks. They don't have books who that are not either up to date or actually good literature that's challenging their minds. And in addition to that, the teachers could be white. They could be from Teach for America, and they're going to be there for 2 years, and then they're going to leave. And they're probably not going to see these students, and the students will probably never see this teacher again. So when these young Black kids see that they are being, one, treated like guinea pigs because these programs are funneling teachers in and out every 2 years, and they see what their role models are supposed to be, which are the people on the corner, and what their environment is, which is not very good, you have no motivation to go back and teach. What you see is most likely he's going to the NBA. He wants to go to the NBA. He's not making it out of here. He wants to rap. He wants to do this. And unfortunately, that is the stereotype of the Black community, but it's also what these students are learning to know for fact. So you have no influence to go teach. You don't want to go teach because the education system has failed you. So you have no longing to go back into this system because it has not done anything for you. What they've seen is he made it out of the hood because he started rapping. He made it out of the hood because he started playing basketball. Those two isolated experiences are so rare. They're so rare.
But yet so powerful.
But yet so powerful and so influential to the developing mind of Black students. And so going back to what you said before about teachers being the prime socializers, that's fact, proven in sociology. And you have to sit here and be like, well, then what the teacher's doing? Yeah. They don't know either, because they have been funneled in there for however long, and they don't really, unless you have a very good teacher who's providing out-of-pocket resources for these students, the likelihood of this student seeing this teacher as a role model that's going to carry them through and then to go teach is so low, because the other factors into how they are perceiving their education, perceiving themselves, it's not on, I'm going to go back and teach. It's, I'm going to have to make it out of here, survive, and then do something with my life. And it's never about education.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Horace, you were saying something, and it made me think about just the assault that Black boys experience as they are navigating these schools. And so if we can recognize that if you purposely drown out the historical contributions of Black folks as you're teaching us history, if you are suspending us at higher rates, if you are expelling us at higher rates, disciplining us at higher rates, these are traumatic experiences that we have, and we have to go to school, right? So we are signing up every single day to revisit our trauma sites. Mm-hmm. As an adult, as you get more agency over your life, why in the heck would you want to go back to the very sites that have produced such trauma that you can't even really recognize? And I have a list of Black men that I did not serve well. Right? As I'm navigating my own teaching, as I'm learning what it means to be culturally responsive and understanding my own identity and the biases with which I work, I have a long list of casualties that I've created. Mm-hmm. Right, and I like tremble saying those things, right? Because I've unfortunately have internalized this same sort of white supremacy sort of approach. And you know, as you age and get older and get more perspective, you have to, you understand how you contribute to that. But that's a real barrier, just those traumatic sites that we encounter. Also, I peel back additionally, as I talk to aspiring teachers and current teachers, the pedagogy that we learn as in our undergrad or our graduate schools or any teacher preparation, we do not see ourselves from that. Mm-hmm. In fact, we are purposely, our contributions, Black and Black men contributions to the pedagogy of education and just the education movement, particularly teachers, has been taken out of that context, right? So we don't hear ourselves, we don't see ourselves.
Yep.
So when we're taught, that doesn't give us much encouragement. That's just yet another thing that we have to kind of wade through. All right. So for myself, I think about as I grow in sort of my locus of impact, right? As I influence, systems creators and folks who are shaping the teaching experience of aspiring and current teachers like yourself, Horace. My question to them always is, how committed to Black male educators, and are you to how committed to you are you? Like, are you going to put your money where your mouth is? Are you going to change your lens on certain things to create spaces where their voice, their identity is elevated? Right? I also think about teachers, current teachers, right? Making them aware that they are contributors to this pipeline, right? If you are contributing to the trauma, I think about myself. Let's just take myself for it. I cannot be both a champion for increasing the pipeline of Black male educators and still teaching in an culturally unresponsive way. That I cannot do that. So my push for myself, right, as an educator, is to teach in a way that honors Black men always, Black students always, students of color always, because that also contributes to the pipeline in the long run.
I think that that's deep, especially taking accountability for past actions. Because again, I know as a Black educator, I've definitely participated in white supremacist activities and values, because part of it is I was conditioned to behave that way. But I appreciate it, right? Once you know better, you do better. So I appreciate you doing better. But this also brings up another point for me, because what we didn't know, right? Part of it is like when people make mistakes, some of it is that they just weren't taught, or they didn't have somebody like to pass that on down. So what counsel or what advice would you guys give to future Black educators or future Black men who aspire to be educators?
I'll jump in here. I would say, listen, follow Horace. Follow his path. This brother is super dope, right? Like he's super committed early, right? And who knows, he may not do the things that he aspires to do. I pray that he does, but he's growing in his understanding even now, right? And I think the earlier the better that we can understand just sort of the plight that's around us. What is our contributions to fight that, or to come alongside these typically marginalized communities? And what is their perspective? And also challenging Horace is challenging teachers even now as a student, right? So he feels empowered to do that. So what I would, the original questions of what can you do now? I think just growing in your knowledge, conversing with more seasoned folks, or mildly seasoned, getting their perspective, understanding what it means to teach, and because all of that is just going to serve you well as a more well-rounded, well-balanced person.
My advice, and it might be a little radical, but I'll keep it. There are so you guys know the white savior complex idea. I won't explain it, because if you have time, Google it, whatever. There are plenty of white people who want to do good, and they think they're here to save us. But in that mindset, it's very destructive. And it's they come with the assumption like you need saving.
Yes.
We can educate ourselves.
We have been.
We educate ourselves. I read books. That's my biggest flex. I read books, and no white person was out here saying like, you go read books. Yeah. Sister Shayna taught me like books are important. And so it's really that whole white savior thing. Use that to your advantage. I have been put in so many spaces where white people have sat in awe of me because I am a Black man who can talk good. That is the foundation for why they will listen to you. You can dress however you want. They might look at you funny, but if you talk like you know what you're talking about because you do, they will listen. They have to listen because part of the reason why we're here is because their ancestors were literally insane. Um, so use that to your advantage. Use their sometimes unwillingness or willingness to listen to tell them how what they're doing might be wrong. Because I can give you an example. I was teaching a professional development for the school district of Philadelphia on the basis of Black male empowerment in the
And
classroom.
just pause and tell them what grade you was in when you was doing that.
10th, 11th, and 12th
Okay.
grade.
Boom.
Yeah. And so, as a 16, 17-year-old student, as a Black man, I can go into those spaces and tell white teachers, you don't know how to teach me. And going previously back to your point, Amir, that culturally responsive pedagogical practices, they're not taught for us. They're taught with generalizing all students in mind as if socioeconomic status, class, gender, race don't come into play, So there is a specific instance where this white teacher was like, well, I have this student who doesn't listen to me, who doesn't come to class, doesn't pay attention, doesn't want to participate, and I don't know what to do. And he was so convinced in his 20, 30 years of teaching that he had done everything, he knew everything. I sat there and told him, do you know what's going on in that student's personal life? Do you know what neighborhood he's coming from? And he couldn't give me the answer to those questions. And if we're making the assumption that he came from a lower income neighborhood, which is a safe assumption, you can kind of piece together what the student was going through either at home or in the neighborhood. And that is a huge factor. So my advice is to make these white people listen to you. You have to. Because they don't know what's going on. They can't live our experiences. They can't. So that's my biggest piece. That's my
And one thing like that Horace is showing, and I hope that I have young people watching, the fearlessness. So if you don't feel empowered, take your empowerment. So you heard him start this conversation by saying this might be a little radical, but you don't have to be afraid to be radical. And what folks don't understand is, again, when the fight is in the hands of the young and you guys are organized and you guys are fighting together, you are unstoppable. So I know Horace is giving direct advice, but I also want y'all to hear the fearlessness in his brother's voice that he is ready to rock and roll for our liberty and our education. Okay? Because I hear that. So as we talk about low income boys, and we know like they have some of the most volatile relationships with education. Where do we think that disconnect happens?
I have a thought. And I won't dwell on this for so long, but I believe my theories happen in preschool. There's this idea, and it's always floating around in my head. You'll go down to, let's say, 69th and Market, right down the street. You'll see several daycare, or about 69th, maybe 56th. And you'll see several daycares on the corner and in between cell phone shops, check cashing places. So if you have 4 daycares on the block, and we make the assumption that, again, these are not well-structured daycares or preschools, you have in those daycares and preschools a lack of resources, a lack of quality of teachers, because I think there's this idea of, instead of making education a race issue, it's a class and wealth issue. So in the United States, we'll try and solve this problem by throwing money at education institutions instead of unpacking the systemic racism that dwells within it. So the disconnect occurs when you have babies and 4-year-olds in a preschool classroom. The teacher's he's too many kids happening at once, not showing direct care to each student without resources that's going to stimulate their brain. And so you are right off the bat, the foundation for what your education is in this daycare or preschool is already, I'm not getting enough care, I'm not getting enough learning, my brain is not being stimulated. Not going to go into biology of it, but children need to be stimulated in order for them to grow and learn. So that disconnect, I think, occurs right in that preschool daycare area where it's like, I'm not getting enough of anything.
Absolutely. We described And our experience, the experience of others, the experience of other Black male students, some extremely violent acts that happens in school. So, we talk about suspensions and expulsions and all that disciplinary stuff. We also talked about sitting in a history class that is taught only from one Eurocentric lens. Those are extremely violent acts, right? All of that, right? All of that. So if every single day I am experiencing violence, if you're hitting me every single day, whether it be emotionally or physically, or whatever, I'm going to react in a certain way. Day after day, year after year, and I have to go here. I can't escape it. This is what I'm subjected to. I'm relegated to these type of teachers, to these type of schools. I'm here. I have to navigate this, and if I don't go here, then I get in trouble. But you don't want me there, right? So I just know from from my experience, and also listen. I also have to take accountability for the environments that I set for my students as well. So again, as I'm reflecting on my own and my coaching practices, as I become a principal, as I'm coaching other teachers, what I am seeing, though, no matter what color you are, what background you are, we can be perpetuators of that violence that is enacted on our students. So it's time for us to disrupt that, one, by becoming aware of that violence, and two, developing these tools that we can disrupt it and interrupt our behaviors, our thoughts, and our actions in the moment. And so that's that culturally responsive pedagogy, but and culturally responsive, not only pedagogy, but also social emotional development. So I would say for us, we as teachers, we as systems creators, create a really extremely violent environment for our Black students and for our Black male students especially.
So with that, right, we're talking about an environment that wasn't created with Black people in mind, with Black boys in mind specifically. Like, why do you think it's so easy for people to discount your experience as a Black man?
Well, do we have practice? Do you see that in any other part of society where we actually value the experience of Black men?
No.
Not only, also for ourselves too, right? So it actually follows that in schools, right? It actually follows that in schools we don't experience that same, elevation of Black male voices. It also schools, and we also talked about the pipeline being only 2% nationally of Black, of teachers are Black males. We don't have folks that can advocate as well. So I think about that, our schools do follow society. They don't have to, right? We can actually be disruptors. And one way we would disrupt it is having more Black educators, Black male educators, I should say.
In response to your question, Sister Shayna, I think it's, of course, as all things do, take roots in slavery, right? So you have slavery and segregation, that whole 400 years of just like, hey, Black people are not worth it. That's the idea that white America had. So I think it's just the idea of like, you are less, you are so much less, and so whatever you tell me I'm doing wrong isn't applicable because you don't matter. We're having to advocate for our own lives at this point. We have to legitimize our lives. Go back to Brown versus Board of Education. We had to legitimize our rights to education. So what was that? Not even a century ago? That just happened historically?
64, somewhere around there.
Yeah, just happened. And it's so crazy because if the perspective of America is you do not matter, prove to us that you matter, you still don't matter, even if you have proof that you matter, then the value of our voices has to be heard by other ears, which is our own community. If we even have to prove to our own community that we matter, that's a problem within a problem. However, that sense of we're not going to listen to Black male voices, we're not going to listen to Black women voices, because it's simply it's so much less than what the majority are saying. And so it's like almost like they don't care, which they prove that they didn't, and they're working to push back on that idea. But if you don't value our lives, you don't value our education. And that's where I think it comes from.
You don't value our lives, you don't value our education, so you really ain't going to value my voice. Is what that's all rooted in. And then the question I kind of want to round this conversation out by is, what can we do to shift the narrative around Black men in education? Because I think having both of you here and being both aspiring educators and talking about the things that our children are going through, but I really feel like we need to make a connection to helping them see teaching as that kind of way out and a way to change the experience for other Black people or other Black young boys coming after them. So what are some concrete things or concrete steps we can take to inspire other young men to be teachers?
If you are a teacher right now, right? If you are an aspiring teacher, keep this in the back of your mind. So when you are leading a school, leading your classroom, but for all teachers, educators right now, with the same vigor and energy that we tell a Black boy that you're the next LeBron James, and I want us to say that to a young man about teaching.
Okay, you the next boy. You the next Booker T.
Come on, you the next Horace Ryan.
Horace Ryan the third. Hello.
Yeah, like you.
Hello.
Listen, start speaking into their lives right now, pouring into them right now. And I'll keep it short because I want us to really hear that, sit with that, observe that, because that's deep, right? And it's a shift in our mindset as well. But
I echo that statement. That's the most profound advice that I continue to hear. And it would never be a cliche because it's literally what we're fighting against. Sit with that. Tell you, because I know for me, my mother and father and my aunt are on this call, and my Morehouse brothers are on this call, and they constantly pour into me and tell me that, they love me, they care about me, you're going to do amazing things. And none of those, I know I'm not good at sports, so being the next LeBron James was not an option, and then nor did I want it to be. My mother poured into me and said, you're going to do great things. My father is the same. They're both in education. So is my aunt. And I guess in addition to all that, not just pouring into our young Black students, but go out and mentor one, because, as you pour into them, you have to establish a connection. If they can see that there's a Black man in their life that isn't their father, uncle, cousin, just a random stranger that they happen to meet, if they can recognize that this Black man cares about me and wants the best for me, and it's pushing against the narrative that I might know, I think that is probably the best advice that I can give right now as an aspiring educator, and just tapping into what Amir is saying. That's a word. Pouring into our students is probably the most important thing that you can do. So, yeah.
And I think when we look at it, especially when we're talking about our most vulnerable populations, right? The reason why that's important is because a lot of times they hear everything that's wrong with them and don't hear enough about what's right with them, and who they can be. And you guys hit on points that are like really personal to me and like hit home, because I am raising a child who's an athlete, but I'm also raising a child who is extremely intelligent and very smart. But the amount of times that people lead with his athletic gifts before they leave with his intellectual gifts are frustrating to me as a parent, because I know that my child is more than an athlete. But on the backside of that, parents who are dealing with struggling children or behavioral children, the amount of times that teachers lead with behavioral issues other than the things that their child are gifted at or the things that are wonderful about a student. And I think that you guys, both of you, are exactly right. Teachers, challenge yourselves to see the beauty in these young Black boys. Challenge yourselves to see the beauty in your students, and challenge yourself to look for qualities that would make great teachers. Because you can see the physicality of a height and say like, oh wow, this kid can play basketball, or he's really big, or he can play football. But then I get people who haven't even seen a kid write a paper and ask him about rapping, right? So challenge yourself, which is all linguistics, but challenge yourself to see the qualities in your students that would make them and want them to be teachers, but they would just need somebody to believe and push them into that area. So both of you are dead on with pour in, invest, and mentor these young Black men. Before we close out, I would just like to leave the floor open to both of you to just give a closing word to like leave us all.
Amir, I'll give it to you first. You got it.
Let more intergenerational conversations like this one occur. There's an energy that our younger generation brings, a perspective that is current, that is couched in their own in current context, that we as an older generation, and I'm not that much older, let me just say, that we can learn from and draw inspiration and energy from. Younger generation of aspiring Black men, teachers, or what have you. The older generation brings experience, brings context, brings the know-how and stick-to-itiveness that can fuel your aspirations. So allow these kind of conversations to occur, because it truly is iron sharpening iron.
Thanks.
All right. I shaded that first of all. Like, that was beautiful. I was kind of taking a second to kind of just dwell on that. But I guess my final statement would be for all the people listening, and if you haven't already realized already, I want you to understand that from my perspective and from the perspective of actually, let's just say the enemy for a second, education is used for upward mobility. There is no excuse for as Black people to sit around and not do anything about achieving and attaining our education, because for centuries rather, it was stripped from us, taken from us, and we're not allowed to get it. If you really think about it, if they were so scared to let us have an education, it must be good for something. It has to be. It has to be. Like there's no other way I can put it. And just go out and learn, because when you're learning, you're just becoming more and more powerful, and that can scare a few people. And that's an absolute good thing. And that is all I say about that before I start preaching again, because it's a really important thing. It's a really important thing.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming on the Black Educator Pipeline podcast today. And I'm just appreciative of the conversation that took place today. I think that it's great for people to see this intergenerational conversation happening, because we need each other. Our seasoned and Molly seasoned folks need our young folks, and our young folks need our seasoned and Molly seasoned folks in order for us to, again, organize and really attack this thing, especially if we're going to build a comprehensive teacher pipeline. But we see they both have the knowledge, but like my sister Ella Baker says, like, the fight is in the hands of the young, right? They just have the energy and the tenacity where it's like we don't. Y'all heard this voice out here. He ready to kick in the door, even before, And I'm tired, child, but I'm ready to coach him through it. Okay? But
I'm in a young phase too. No?
I mean, are you ready to kick in the door? You kicked it in a few times, right? So Horace coming behind us. He's ready.
I'm gonna get behind him.
He's the fresh blood in the fight right now.
Yep.
But these conversations are so important. We'll definitely be having more of these on this show and in this platform. But again, I thank all of you. But before we go, I just want to give a shout out and a call to action. If all of you could please take a second to support our call to action, urging Biden's administration and Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona to prioritize teacher diversity, as billions of dollars are directed to education to build back from the pandemic. Add your name to the joint letter by Sharif, from my CEO from the center, and Brightbeam, to let us make sure building a diverse teacher pipeline is the policy priority for the current administration. Over 20 education organizations have already signed, plus 500 individuals have already signed on. So I'm urging everybody watching today to please sign your name to this petition to prioritize teacher diversity, so we can have more people like Amir and more people like Horace in our pipeline. But they aren't like unique unicorns, that this becomes a real priority of this administration. But as always, I appreciate everybody. If you like today's show, please share, please comment, please tag a BME, which is a Black belt educator. But like, share, and comment. And again, Amir and Horace, thank you for today. This has been a very, very powerful show. To all my co-conspirators watching, I'll see you guys next Thursday right here live for Building the Black Educator Pipeline.